Alrighty, hey everyone, Patricio here yet again with another installment of the Abstract webinar series. And today I have the pleasure of having Daniel on board. And Daniel's been supporting our mission, I would say, from the very start. I think probably around 2021, something like that. And I would say Daniel's one of those legendary people in the GovTech space that's seen a lot of things happen and has seen a lot of the involvement, especially around data, which we're going to talk about today. So without further ado, Daniel, would love if you can provide a quick little background or intro on sort of the key highlights in your career around GovTech, and then we can just talk about data and what's going on.
Great. Yeah, thanks for having me on. I'm really excited to, I've always enjoyed working with you and the team at Abstract, and I'm excited about talking about this today. This is what I like to talk about. In my career, I have focused on trying to two things: transparency among all entities, not just government transparency, which I think is something that we talk about a lot and think about a lot, but just transparency among all actors, individuals, residents, and as well as interacting with their government. And a lot of that has focused on data, how to deliver information, structured information, but not just structured information, but also, just knowledge about what's going on with our government. So focused a lot on the open data movement. I helped start a website called EveryBlock, which was an early experiment in GovTech. It was in 2007 we pulled together local news and public information into one place, and the idea was an RSS feed for your block. And I was the only non-technical person on that team, so I was called the people person. I was the person who talked to people and tried to get data from government. So my job early on was I would literally call up the mayor's office, whatever it was, 555-212-555-3000, and say,
Yep.
"Can I speak to the mayor, please?" And they would say, "Well, the mayor's busy." And I would say, "All right, well, can you tell him to call me back?" And then they said, "Well, what do you want?" And then I would ask them, "Well, you know what? I'd love to get every building permit." And they would say, "Okay, well, which one?" I would say, "All of them." And they would say, "Well, okay, well, what date?" And I would say, "All of them." And then they'd be like, "All right, hold on, just what do you?" So to make a long story short, that kind of helped lead to the open government data movement, where they ended up connecting me and every one of the municipalities that we worked with the goofballs who cared about those things. There was invariably some goofball in the mayor's office who cared about goofy things like that. So that's pretty much the start of my caring about this kind of stuff.
Interesting. So I didn't know. So you started off with essentially building code data. It was for building codes, and that's sort of like the need that sort of sparked this was data around, was it like planning commission data or
in some places, yeah, like in Boston. In Boston, planning commission. Actually, the impetus, the very, very first data we got was crime data. The site started from Adrian Holobodi's experiment called ChicagoCrime.org, which was an extremely influential early Google Maps. He basically reverse engineered Google Maps before there was a Google Maps API. Cool. So he was putting dots on maps. And so my job was to go beyond crime data. So we wanted to get all the crime data, but I had to get other data like restaurant inspections, building permits. Those were the kind of things that were laying on the shelf, as we used to say.
And so back then, I mean, you were literally calling these places. And I feel like in some instances, you still need to do that today, unfortunately. Yep. But what have you seen in terms of evolution of accessibility in this data at the local, state, federal level, or all? What are some of the key sort of changes you've seen in accessibility around these government documents?
Yeah. So there's a paradox of the continuum. For instance, in Chicago, the reason why ChicagoCrime.org happened in Chicago was not just because the inventor of Django, Adrian, lived here, but
Oh
because
wow.
the Chicago Police Department published the data. And
Hmm.
this is like 2004, 2003, and 2005. And that data was published on FTP sites that had also, they're all geocoded. Like,
Hmm.
like the Department of Innovation and Technology of the City of Chicago and the Chicago Police Department deserve a lot of credit for formulating that data in that way. So it was accessible via FTP server to people who had that capacity. Um, so that's, it, there's a long history of that kind of stuff in all the other municipalities we work with, New York and Seattle and San Francisco and Boston, DC. Especially. I mean, DC was, again, one of the leaders in municipal government of Washington, DC. Um, so it was accessible, but it was very reliable too, because it was very static data, and it just, they didn't break the
Hmm.
data very often, right? Another example of accessible is the City of New York BIS, Building Information System, which
Hmm.
is an ancient system. I mean, it was ancient in 2007, and it still exists in essentially the same format. And it publishes an enormous amount of public data in an interface that is extremely reliable and extremely scrapable. So
Hmm.
there's that's sort of a longer answer to be the beginning of your question about accessibility. It's accessible to scrapers. Um,
Yeah.
and then around 2010, 11, company like Socrata, right? So
Yeah.
Socrata is the
Dakota.
company that really was the leader in going to municipalities and other units of governments and saying, hey, let's have structured data, right? Let's have feeds. Let's have, because that's what I kept asking for was data feeds, and they didn't know what that meant, and they didn't want to give it to us. But it was in effect a feed. That's what I mean. It's a paradox, right? In effect, because it was so
Right.
stable and it was reliable, it was a feed. And then we got into that era of the 2011-ish, and that era was driven in terms of the publication was driven by the 8 Principles of Open Government Data,
Hmm.
which I helped write and was published in 2007. And there were 8 principles, and they essentially drove by those principles. And that was we're kind of still in that era now,
Yeah.
in terms of data feeds, and it's still the dominant tool, and that's pretty much what's up.
Do you think that, well, two questions, right? One is it looks like a lot of times these governments, whether they're local or state or federal, right, agencies, entities, they do it because there's some other reason. There's some reason where they have to suddenly make a structured data set or portal, right, for people to access these documents. Do you think? Well, it sounds like there's been a lot of movements to try and standardize this across governments. So do you think that there's still merit in doing that? And I say that as a founder of a company that, most of our IP is around how we scrape and structure messy government data. So we plan on continuing to do this for a while because we think it's going to take a while, if ever, right, for government to standardize the way they create laws, codes, regulations, legislation, you name it. But do you think there's a path forward there still, at any level of government?
Well, the premise of your question I like, right? You're like, what you first start off by saying they did it for different reasons. And the
Mm.
reasons why it became trendy for units of government to publish data was for executives to gain and maintain power. That's the only reason why they did it.
Yeah.
Um, and we recognize that. Is there still value in it? I believe that and this kind of gets into what I think is coming in the future, and what I'm excited about is that almost neurotic focus on taxonomy and clarity and downloadable Excel and blah blah
Yep.
is is really old fashioned now. right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Because of, tools that have existed, machine learning tools, and, but clearly the revolution in AI has made it almost old fashioned to care about taxonomies and to have things in a certain place. And I think it opens up opportunities because it reduces the labor associated with the government, and it in the only thing that really matters is that we level with each other, whether we're the government or the people. So that we tell the truth. Like we spend so much time trying to figure out what is true.
Right.
And if we spend less time of it, if we all just tell the truth, right? What is true about the regulations for this particular agency? What will be true about the regulations? I mean, that's, a lot of the work that you and your team do every day. If people just told us all the time in different ways and in different in different methodologies, and were always expressing themselves, we'd be a lot better off.
I agree. Now, I think the caveat to that is whatever tools are allowing you to do that, making those tools accessible to multiple levels and layers, right, of businesses, individuals, etc. And I think a lot of what we've seen in this space has all been B2B, right? I mean, us included right now, we're very much focused on selling to enterprises and making a solution for these corporate teams and large nonprofits. But I think now with all these tools that have been coming out around large language models, Gen AI, the ability to create a consumer-focused product is becoming a lot more doable. Again, I know there are a couple of multiple busts in the GovTech space around making a consumer-esque product. And I think it was because it was really hard to make something that was digestible, that the everyday person could understand. So do you have any thoughts or observations in the consumer space in GovTech? Because I feel like I haven't heard much from people. I think we're going to hear more.
Yeah, I think that we have heard, let's put it this way. The consumer space in GovTech has driven our culture for the last decade, when you think about it. There's a lack of technology tools around it, but when the state, when state power kills people, there is a reaction from people. That is people interacting with their government. Clearly, all of the Sturm und Drang around voting and counting votes is about the a C2 government, right? A consumer-facing government response. My suggestion is that, in large part, those functions and even the technology around those functions are acceptable. They work. They do things in large part, right?
Yeah.
When they tragically go awry, things go pretty poorly. So that's just sort of a primer to my general thought that I've had for a very long time, which is that people don't want to think about their government all the time, and people in GovTech think they do. It follows pain. It follows need.
It's a visceral. It's almost like a visceral reaction. Yeah.
Yeah. Right. And I was just describing the most horrific ones. Right. When you're involved in a crime, when a crime has been committed against you, when there's an injustice, and that's why I think one of the bright spots in GovTech over the last decade has been the movement around the provision of benefits. Right. Like trying to make less drag in around the provision of healthcare benefits and veterans benefits and WIC, and I think there's been a lot of energy around that, and appropriately so. So I think that that's where I think there's a lot of focus.
Yeah, and I think that really sticks with me. People do not think about government often. Most people don't until something goes wrong. And then that's a
feature. That's good.
It is a feature. That's the point. You're supposed to just live life, right?
Exactly.
Yeah. And with all that, what sort of excites you the most? I always like asking this with during our webinar series, getting people's take on what excites them or maybe even scares them a little bit about the future. I always say like 5 to 10 years, where everything's going. AI obviously being a hot topic, but there's a lot of other things, a lot of other advancements are going to hit us as well. But what have you been thinking about?
Well, I think that the same thing I'm optimistic about is the thing I'm pessimistic about, and it's around the enormous amount of data collected in surveillance. So surveillance is a term of art used in public health that is just determining how much COVID is in wastewater and how many people have the flu. That's surveillance, right? But also surveillance is clearly CCTV cameras and Shot Spotter here in Chicago, which is very controversial in terms of being able to for police response in terms of where there have been gunshots. I think that we have not, as a culture, caught up to the fact that it's over, that we are going to be surveilled endlessly. It will never be less. And surveillance is a feature of our of sophisticated market democracies. It's just what's going to happen. I believe, and I'm optimistic, that there's somewhere else that we can go with it that relates to democratic, people-centric control over and control and use of surveillance such that we can answer these questions. What happened? That's what we're always trying to ask, right? We were talking earlier, right? Like, what is the rule, right? The answer to the question, what happened, is absolutely central to so many different things that we do. Every trial, every discovery session in web development is, hey, what happened, right? So I truly believe that we have a lot of work to do, and we have a lot of justice and equity work to do, and a lot of really tough conversations for people who hold more power to do. But getting from here to there and using all of that data, and by that I do mean data, right? All the data collected in all of these surveillance systems, to bring them to bear to make lives better for everybody, and the key is to be controlled by people. I'm pretty optimistic.
And I think there was a big boom and bust, temporary bust around blockchain, all the Web3 technologies, which were made with very good intentions to literally solve this core issue. But I think they're still like a little ahead of their time. A lot of that infrastructure, it takes a little bit more like a lot more to start implementing some sort of new blockchain technology versus, hey, here's a new foundational AI model. Let's just deploy this with the app we already have, right? And I think that's why AI is taking off much faster and is going to stick a little bit more than the whole Web3 innovation, just because AI can be implemented now, right? And these foundation models can be, and you can reap the benefits of that. Whereas, if tomorrow we decide to start using blockchain, right, to have better methods around, how we store individual people's data. That's going to be really expensive. And I don't know if it's entirely possible to do with our current tech stack.
Totally agree. And I love, that parallelism you made with AI, because, over the last 10 years, if there's anything that CivicTech people have made fun of, it's chatbots and web and blockchain, right? Yeah. Like, it's just like top of mind. I think about this often when I'm using, commercial grade chatbots. It's like 5 years ago, anybody in CivicTech would deride, absolutely make fun of blockchain and chatbots in the same breath. And here it is that chatbots are literally the most important innovation going. So I agree that blockchain has a lot to do, and you point out the real key where it is, and it's in privacy, right? It's in being able to protect vulnerable people, to protect all people, but there's a lot of promise there.
Totally agree. Last thing, Arte Agora. I feel like that's something I learned about that I never knew about when I met you. So what should the world know about Arte Agora? Because I know that's like your side thing. Would be great to end on this.
Thank you for giving me the opportunity to talk about Arte Agora. Arte Agora is art made, sold, or placed in the public way. And if you live in any place of density, I guarantee you that you have enjoyed Arte Agora. So it's any sticker, we call them slaps, right? Any slap that's on a pole, any wheat paste poster that is glued to a wall, any art that is placed, in the public way, any person who sits and does plein air drawing and tries to sell you their art. That's what we focus on. My wife and I, Sean-Marie O'Neill, and I have been art critics, and we've written a couple of books about Arte Agora, and it's something that we're really passionate about.
And I think it's really cool, which is why I brought it up, and I feel like the world should know about this. So, Daniel, this was a pleasure. If people want to learn more about you, LinkedIn, website, what do you prefer? Where should people go to learn more about what you're doing?
DanielXO'Neill.com.
There you go. Got a website too. So, fantastic. Well, thank you again, Daniel. And we'll be planning some more good stuff in the near future. Take care.
Bye now.